Your life at every level of witness protection. Level 1, the applicant. And before you can even process what that phrase really means, before your mind has time to catch up with the irreversible nature of the situation you've placed yourself in, you are already sitting inside a federal building that feels too quiet for something this life-altering, already holding a pen over documents that will erase every trace of who you've ever been, and already realizing deep in your chest that this is not the beginning of a new life. This is the controlled demolition of your old one. There are no dramatic speeches, no music swelling in the background, no moment where someone looks you in the eye and tells you this will all be okay, because nobody here deals in comfort, only in outcomes, and the outcome is simple. You either disappear completely, or you become a name on a list of people who didn't make it long enough to regret staying. The marshals across from you don't rush you, not because they're patient, but because they've seen this moment too many times to misunderstand it. The exact second where reality stops feeling theoretical and starts feeling permanent. The second where your identity shifts from something you own into something you are about to surrender. Your name sits at the top of the page. The real one. The one that carries your childhood, your friendships, your mistakes, your plans. Your entire history compressed into a single word that now feels heavier than anything it ever has before. Because you understand, maybe for the first time, that names are not just labels, they are anchors. And you are about to cut yours loose forever. You hesitate just slightly, and that hesitation is everything. It's the last fragment of your old life trying to hold on, trying to convince you that there might still be another option. Another path that doesn't end with you becoming a ghost in your own story. But deep down you already know the truth. There is no alternative that ends with you alive. So you sign, and in that quiet, almost invisible moment, you stop existing. Level 2, the extraction. It doesn't feel like a rescue, it feels like a disappearance. Fast, controlled, and deliberately unremarkable. Because the safest way to move someone who is being hunted is to make sure nobody ever realizes they were there to begin with. And within days, you are no longer sleeping in your own bed, no longer waking up to the same ceiling, no longer surrounded by anything that proves your life used to be real. The safe house is designed to be forgotten, the kind of place that blends into the background of the world so completely that even your own memory struggles to hold onto it. And the silence inside it is not peaceful, it is heavy. Filled with the weight of everything you are not allowed to do, every person you cannot call, every message you cannot send, every part of your life that has been abruptly cut off without explanation. Time stretches in a way that feels unnatural, each are dragging longer than the last. Because without connection, without identity, without purpose, you begin to understand something unsettling. Who you are has always been tied to who knows you, and now that no one can know you, you are left alone with a version of yourself that feels incomplete. When they move you, it's in the middle of the night. No warning, no ceremony, just a knock on the door and a sequence of actions that happen so quickly. You don't have time to question them, because questioning is not part of the process anymore. Compliance is. And within minutes, you are inside a car that looks like every other car on the road, driven by people who are trained to disappear in plain sight. You try to memorize the route, the turns, the direction of the sun when it starts to rise. But exhaustion wins, and when you wake up, everything is different in a way that feels deeper than geography. Like you've crossed into a version of reality where your past has no authority. Level 3, the new identity. This is where it becomes real in a way that paperwork never could. Because now you are not just leaving your life behind. You are being handed a completely new one and expected to live it convincingly enough that no one ever questions it. A new name, a new birthday, a new history. A new version of yourself that has technically existed for decades, but only came into being yesterday. And as you flip through the documents, you realize that this person is more real on paper than you are now, because your original identity has been reduced to something that exists only in restricted files and fading memories. You practice your new name over and over again. At first it feels wrong, like you're impersonating someone. Like at any moment someone will stop you and point out the obvious. That you don't belong inside this identity. That you're wearing someone else's life like a costume that doesn't quite fit. but repetition is powerful, and slowly, dangerously, it starts to feel normal. Level 4, the integration. This is where the illusion becomes survival. Where small, everyday interactions carry consequences far greater than they should. Because every conversation is a test you cannot afford to fail. Every casual question a potential crack in the story you are trying to maintain. What high school did you go to? Where are you from? What do your parents do? Simple questions, deadly stakes. You answer smoothly because you've practiced, because hesitation is suspicious. And suspicion is the one thing that can unravel everything. And as people nod and accept your answers without question, you realize something both comforting and terrifying. Most people don't look that closely, which means you can hide, which also means you are completely alone. You make acquaintances, you build routines. You learn the rhythm of a life that technically belongs to you now, and over time, something strange begins to happen. The sharp edges of your old identity start to fade. Not because you want them to, but because your mind is adapting, rewriting itself to survive in this new reality. Level 5, the testifier. Just when the new life starts to feel stable, just when you begin to believe you might actually be able to exist like this indefinitely, the call comes, pulling you back into the very world you escaped, reminding you that this was never just about survival. It was about justice, and justice demands your voice. You are flown back under heavy protection, surrounded by people who treat you less like a person and more like a critical asset. Because in that courtroom, your words carry the power to dismantle something dangerous, something violent, something that has already taken lives and will take more if it isn't stopped. The courtroom is smaller than you imagined, more intimate, more suffocating. And when you see them, the people you testified against, sitting just feet away, looking at you with expressions that don't need words to communicate their intent, you understand exactly why this program exists, because without it, you wouldn't make it out alive. Level 6, the ghost. Years pass, longer than you expected, longer than anyone ever told you it would take. And the life you built, the one that started as a fragile construct held together by rules and fear, becomes something solid, something routine, something that almost feels real. Except for the quiet moments when you remember that everything about it is built on a foundation of absence. You think about your old life less often now, not because it stopped mattering, but because remembering it hurts in a way that serves no purpose. You become the new name. You respond to it without thinking. You live inside it without resistance, and one day, without even realizing when it happened, you understand something that changes everything. You didn't just survive, you transformed. And the person you used to be is gone in a way that even death couldn't accomplish. Level 7, the permanent life. This is the part nobody talks about. The part that happens after the danger fades, but the consequences remain. The part where you are given the option to go back, but realize there is nothing left to return to because time didn't stop when you disappeared. It kept moving, reshaping everything without you. Your old life is not waiting. Your old self is not preserved. Your absence has already been absorbed by the world. So you stay, not because you have to, but because you choose to. And that choice, more than anything else, defines who you are now. Not the name you were given, not the one you lost, but the one you decided to keep, the one that allowed you to survive, to rebuild, to continue in a way that most people will never understand. Because somewhere out there, in a version of reality you no longer belong to, your original life ended quietly. And here, in this one, your new life continues. Unnoticed, uncelebrated, but undeniably real. And that, more than anything, is the truth about witness protection. It doesn't just hide you. It replaces you. Level 8, the fracture. It does not arrive like a breaking point with noise and chaos, and something obvious that you can point to and say this is where everything changed. Instead, it seeps into your life quietly, through repetition and routine and the slow erosion of certainty until one morning you wake up and, for a brief suspended second, your mind hesitates between two identities, and that hesitation feels like standing on the edge of something invisible, because you cannot immediately remember which name belongs to the life you are currently living and to which one belongs to the life that no longer officially exists. And even though the confusion resolves itself almost instantly, the impact lingers far longer. because now you understand that the separation between who you were and who you are pretending to be is no longer clean. It is blending, dissolving, becoming something you cannot easily untangle anymore. You move through your morning with mechanical precision, brushing your teeth, making coffee, checking your phone that contains nothing personal and nothing dangerous, performing actions that look completely ordinary to anyone watching but feel subtly disconnected to you, because each movement is anchored in a life that was built deliberately rather than grown naturally. And the longer you inhabit it, the more you begin to question whether authenticity is something you lost or something you are, slowly reconstructing in a different form that just happens to be rooted in survival rather than choice. Level 9, the adaptation. Human beings are designed to survive even the most unnatural conditions, and what once felt impossible begins to feel routine through repetition and necessity, until the new identity stops feeling like a performance and starts feeling like a baseline, not because it is more true than your original self, but because it is the version of you that is allowed to exist in the world without consequence. And over time, your mind stops resisting this shift because resistance is exhausting and offers no reward, while acceptance, even if it is partial and reluctant, allows you to function without constantly feeling like you are standing on unstable ground. You begin to notice that your reactions are no longer delayed when someone calls your new name, that your responses to personal questions come naturally without requiring mental rehearsal, that your emotional investment in your daily routine has increased in ways that would have felt impossible in the early days. And this realization brings with it a complicated mix of relief and unease, because on one hand it means you are adapting successfully and reducing risk, but on the other hand it raises a question you cannot easily answer, which is whether the person you used to be is fading because of time, or because you are unconsciously choosing to let them go. Level 10, the slip. It is not dramatic and it is not obvious, and that is precisely why it is dangerous. Because the most significant risks in your new life do not announce themselves loudly. They exist in the smallest inconsistencies, the slightest delays, the almost imperceptible moments where your story and your instincts fail to align perfectly. And one afternoon during an otherwise ordinary conversation, you hesitate just long enough before answering a question about your past that you feel the shift internally, even if the other person does not react outwardly. And that fraction of a second expands in your mind long after the moment has passed. Because you understand that in a life built entirely on consistency, even the smallest deviation has the potential to unravel everything. You replay the interaction repeatedly, analyzing tone, timing, wording, searching for any indication that the hesitation was noticed or interpreted as something unusual. And while there is no immediate consequence and no visible reaction, the absence of feedback does not bring comfort, because uncertainty is far more difficult to manage than confirmation, and you are left with the unsettling awareness that you will never truly know how close you are to making a mistake that matters until it is too late to correct it. Level 11, the perception of surveillance. Even in the absence of real danger, your mind remains calibrated to detect it. And over time, you begin to notice patterns in your environment that may or may not be significant. A car that passes by more than once, a stranger whose gaze lingers slightly longer than expected, a sequence of events that feels just structured enough to trigger suspicion. And while you can logically attribute these observations to coincidence or heightened awareness, logic does not fully override instinct, especially when your entire existence has been shaped by the knowledge that there are people who once had reason to find you and eliminate you. You adjust your behavior subtly without making it obvious, choosing seating positions that allow visibility of entrances and exits, maintaining awareness of your surroundings in a way that appears casual but is actually deliberate. And these adjustments become integrated into your routine to the point where they no longer feel like precautions but like standard operating procedure, which is both effective and unsettling because it means the version of you that exists now has been permanently altered by circumstances that are no longer actively present but still psychologically influential. Level 12, the connection dilemma. Forming relationships becomes a complex balancing act between authenticity and concealment. Because while you are capable of building rapport and sharing experiences, and participating in social interactions in ways that appear completely normal. There is always a layer of information that cannot be accessed or disclosed, and this limitation creates a structural boundary within every connection you form, regardless of how genuine the interaction may feel on the surface. When someone expresses interest in knowing more about you, asking questions that in any other context would be considered basic and harmless, you respond with answers that are technically accurate, within the framework of your constructed identity, but intentionally incomplete in ways that prevent deeper scrutiny. And while this approach is effective in maintaining consistency, it introduces a subtle but persistent distance that prevents full emotional transparency, resulting in relationships that function well enough to sustain social stability, but never quite reach the depth that comes from complete openness. Level 13, the internal division. As time progresses, the distinction between your original identity and your constructed identity becomes less defined, not because one replaces the other entirely, but because they begin to coexist in a way that creates occasional cognitive dissonance, particularly in moments of introspection where you attempt to reconcile your past experiences with your current reality and find that the connection between them feels less direct than it once did. You recognize memories as your own, but experience them with a degree of detachment that suggests a shift in perspective, as if you are recalling events that belong to a previous version of yourself, rather than the person you are now. And this shift is not inherently negative, but it does introduce a level of complexity to your sense of self that requires ongoing adjustment, because identity is no longer a fixed point, but a dynamic construct influenced by both necessity and adaptation. Level 14, the normalization of absence. Over an extended period, the absence of your former life becomes less acute, not because it has been resolved or replaced, but because it has been integrated into your baseline expectations. And what once felt like a constant loss gradually transitions into a background condition that no longer demands immediate attention or emotional processing on a daily basis. You no longer instinctively reach for your phone to contact people from your past, not because you have forgotten them entirely, but because the behavioral pattern associated with that action has been extinguished through repetition and reinforcement. And this change illustrates the extent to which human behavior can be reshaped by constraints, even when those constraints are externally imposed and initially resisted. Level 15, the irreversible shift. At some point, without a clearly identifiable moment of transition, you realize that the life you are living is no longer temporary in your perception, even if it was originally intended to be. And this realization does not arrive with dramatic emotional intensity, but with a quiet acknowledgement that the trajectory of your existence has fundamentally changed in a way that cannot be undone. Simply by reintroducing your original identity into the equation, you understand that returning to your former life, even if it were logistically possible, would not restore what was lost, because the passage of time and the accumulation of new experiences have altered your perspective to such an extent that the person who left and the person who would return are no longer the same. And this awareness solidifies the understanding that the transformation you have undergone is not reversible, not in a practical sense and not in a psychological sense. And that acceptance of this reality is necessary for continued stability within the life you now inhabit. Level 16, the quiet acceptance. It does not arrive as relief or happiness or any kind of emotional resolution that feels satisfying in the way people imagine closure should feel. Instead, it settles into your life gradually, through repetition and the absence of resistance, through the simple act of continuing day after day without questioning every decision, without replaying every loss, without measuring your current existence against a version of reality that no longer applies. And one morning you realize that you went an entire day without thinking about who you used to be. And that realization is both unsettling and stabilizing at the same time, because it confirms something you were not entirely sure you wanted to accept, which is that your mind has finally stopped fighting the life you were living and has started to fully inhabit it. You move through your routine with a level of presence that was not possible before, not because your circumstances have changed, but because your relationship to them has shifted. And this shift allows you to experience moments as they are rather than as comparisons to what they could have been, which creates a form of peace that is not dependent on external validation or recognition but on internal alignment with the reality you have chosen to continue. Level 17. The unspoken identity. At this stage, your name is no longer something you consciously think about. It is something you respond to automatically, something that integrates into your sense of self without requiring effort or reinforcement, and while you are aware on an intellectual level that it was constructed, that it replaced something real and personal and deeply connected to your past, emotionally it functions no differently than any identity formed through time and experience, which leads you to a realization that challenges your original understanding of what identity actually is. You begin to understand that identity is not defined solely by origin but by continuity, by the accumulation of actions and decisions and experiences that shape how you perceive yourself and how others perceive you, and by the definition the person you are now is just as real as the person you used to be, even if the path that led here was not one you would have chosen under different circumstances. Level 18. The life that continues. There is no final moment where everything resolves. No clear endpoint where you can say the process is complete and the story is finished. Because life does not operate in defined chapters. With clean endings, it continues forward regardless of the structure you try to impose on it. And so you keep living, not as an act of survival anymore, but as an act of existence, engaging with your environment, maintaining your routines, forming connections within the limits that define your situation, and gradually building a life that, while unconventional in its foundation, is functional and sustainable in practice. You go to work, you interact with people, you take care of responsibilities that have nothing to do with the past you left behind, and in doing so you reinforce the reality of your current identity through consistent behavior, which over time becomes indistinguishable from any other lived experience in terms of psychological impact. Level 19. The perspective shift. When you occasionally think back to the moment where everything changed, to the decision that set this entire process in motion, you no longer experience it with the same intensity or emotional charge that you did in the beginning. Instead, you view it with a level of detachment that allows for analysis rather than reaction, recognizing that the circumstances you faced limited your options in ways that made the outcome almost inevitable. You understand that the concept of choice in that context was constrained by external factors that prioritized survival over preference. And while this does not eliminate the sense of loss associated with what you gave up, it reframes it in a way that reduces internal conflict and allows for a more stable interpretation of your own actions. Level 20. The enduring reality. The most significant realization is not about what you lost or what you gained, but about what remains, which is the continuation of your life in a form that, while altered, is still yours to live and shape within the boundaries that exist. And this realization carries with it a level of responsibility that extends beyond survival into the realm of purpose. Even if that purpose is not externally recognized or validated, you understand that your existence now represents a convergence of necessity and adaptation, a demonstration of how identity can be restructured without being entirely erased, and how continuity can be maintained even when the foundation has been fundamentally altered. And while this understanding does not resolve every question or eliminate every trace of uncertainty, it provides a framework that supports ongoing stability and allows you to move forward without the constant need to reconcile past and present as opposing forces.